Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. I am one of two co-hosts, Corey Blake, and I'll be excusing Josh Steinley, my partner and co-host on this episode. He was unable to make it with some scheduling conflicts, but he'll be back. I had the great opportunity this week in this episode to talk to Chris Pierce. I'll dive in a little bit to the awesome guy that Chris is. I want to give a bit of his background. Chris is a performance and resilient expert at the Ready and Resilient Performance Center on Schofield Barracks, which is the Army post in Oahu, Hawaii. He graduated from Cal State Fullerton with a master's in sports psychology. In 2010, he began training mental toughness and performance enhancement skills with professional and amateur surfers. In 2014, he began training special operations soldiers at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And in 2015, he moved out to Schofield in Hawaii to train soldiers in performance and resilience skills. He's currently working with special operations soldiers out there. Chris and I had the opportunity to discuss his childhood and his upbringing, what makes him tick, what led him to study sports psychology and exercise science. He's got a really interesting background. He's an avid surfer. He has been for his entire life. He talks in the podcast a little bit about when he started surfing at the age of 14 and how that's kind of played a role in his life. We talk all about his professional expertise and these mental toughness trainings and all of this work that he does with soldiers and with professional athletes, how it pertains to helping them discover their true potential and also finding ways to always, in all circumstances, find hope. We also talk at length about one of the greatest trials that Chris has faced, if not the greatest. He and his wife, Taylor, just this year, at the end of February, early March, lost one of their children, Griff, also known as Griff the Great, at the age of 8 years old. Griff passed away earlier this year, and we talk at length about that. We really dive into how amazing that he was. I myself had the privilege to know Griff and the special human that he was, the special spirit that he was, and the amazing light that he was to the world. And really am so appreciative to Chris for the energy and emotion and time that he took to have this difficult conversation as we really dived into what it was like to face that tragedy just a few months ago, but also how Chris was able to, with his family and his other children and his wife, find hope in the face of absolute tragedy. And it's something that, as you'll hear in the podcast, as you listen to the story, it's something he's still working on, as you can imagine. It's something that is a test every single day, but very few times have I had the opportunity to listen to somebody who has just so recently been faced with such a trial that can really provide wisdom and experience on how one can truly find hope even in the darkest of times. So I'm so appreciative to Chris for the time and energy that he took to talk with me about that. And I hope that as you listen to this podcast and listen to this episode, you'll feel what I felt, which is the lasting memory of Griff and what he represents, and that it'll make you, as it made me, want to live a little bit better, be a little bit kinder. And again, as Chris and his family are examples to us, to always find hope even in the darkest of circumstances. Please enjoy my conversation with Chris Pierce.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now. Perfect.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley. Well, cool, man. I talked to Richie last week, so I interviewed Richie. And
nice.
And we had a great conversation. And then I was just continuing to put together a list of who I wanted to talk to. And I was like, man, you know what? I think it would be awesome to talk to Chris, somebody I've looked up to for a long time. But also I feel like just given our conversations in the past about what you do professionally and even what some of your goals are professionally, some of the stuff you've told me about. I mean, I've listened to even your podcast that you were working on in the past. And then obviously, I think a lot of what we're talking about as it pertains to hope and kind of strategies for leveraging hope to get through difficult times. I mean, obviously, I think there's quite a bit that we can talk about there too with the personal things that you and Taylor have faced and stuff. So I'm excited to talk through it, and I appreciate you taking some time to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was a little caught off guard when you asked. And
honestly, I've always enjoyed listening to you be in an instructor role. Like, I think I've told you that before, but
yeah.
It's so Anyways, I love talking to you. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I really like just personally to get to know people's backgrounds and where they're coming from, especially people that I've been friends with like you for a while, but we've never sat down and really like dived into where you came from and all of that. So I'm really excited to get some more context of your background and your upbringing, and then kind of roll that into what does your life look like now and all of the in-between, So my first question is, what was it like growing up? Where did you grow up? What was your family life like? Just give me the background on Chris Pierce before I knew Chris Pierce way back in the day.
Have you seen Stranger Things?
I have.
I mean, erase the demigorgons and all that.
Okay, that's good.
But the whole like kids riding bikes, having their own free will to just kind of go wherever.
Yeah.
In a growing town, like our street had 10 houses on it. That street has, 200 houses on it now.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of open fields and catching snakes. And like my mom we would catch rattlesnakes and my mom would cook them for us.
How in the world do you catch a rattlesnake?
Well, first you need a Stanley. Stanley was a little bit older, lived down the street. He was like this adventure seeker, but really it was like he had a long PVC pipe with like wire threaded through it. And so there was a little loop on the end, and then he just made like a duct tape handle on the other end. So you flip over stuff, find a snake, slip that over its head and pull it tight.
Oh man. And that sounds like my worst nightmare. So talk to me about your love affair with surfing.
So my parents grew up surfing. They were luckier and grew up near the coast, but they both kind of fell away from it. And then we had a big Samoan guy move in that shaped boards. And so he would take like the teenagers to go surf like on the weekends. And so that's kind of how it started. Was my older brother got into it, and he was kind of in this group that would go. And then, I started going with him. And surfing sucks at first. Like it's the worst. Like, especially when the water is cold and you start out and you don't want to put any money into it because it's just like you don't do it that much. And I had this 7.6 Sunset gun, a single fin, bright yellow, like the worst board to learn on. Like
it sounds like.
I remember taking that thing out, and we had been beach people. Like we would spend the summers like going to the beach all the time. And so I knew how to catch waves on like a boogie board and stuff. And so I was like, well, can we take that thing? And so we took the big yellow board and just kind of went from there. I do remember my first wave that I rode the face on. It was like a 1 foot wave, like this little tiny thing. And where I caught it and turned so that I was actually riding the wave.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
And that was kind of the moment of like, oh, I get it now. Because at first it's just like a battle to like not be freezing, not be like exhausted, and then once you get there, it's like, oh, okay, game on.
Okay, so you're growing up outside of San Diego, you're surfing a little bit, you're catching rattlesnakes, you're riding your bike all over. I'm just picturing now the kids from Stranger Things, like you said. But what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had no idea. My mom always said like, oh, you're going to be a teacher of some kind. And
me and your mom, I know what your mom's talking about.
I don't know why she said that. Like I can think of like, I always liked kids. Like I was that, I don't know, like 10-year-old that could take a baby and like rock it and be comfortable. And so I was always just good with kids. So maybe that was it. Or maybe I don't remember ever like teaching people anything. Like I definitely was not like a smart kid. I mean, I graduated high school with like a 2.17 or something. I was like, you think I should be a teacher? But I don't even do good in school.
Yeah, your mom was wise though. She knew that there was a lot more to teaching than kidding.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I didn't ever like stop to think about it, even to the point of being in college and taking a whole array of classes because trying to figure out like, okay, what interests me in like the academic world. So I bounced all over.
What were some of the things you bounced?
I took business classes, like pre-med, like kind of the sciences, exercise science. I Spanish.
You sound
like I just
similar to me.
I was just all over the place. Like
I was the same way. It's funny. I always joke like at one point between the ages of like 21 and 28, I was going to be like 30 or 40 different things. And I was sure of it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a dentist. So I started taking the classes. I'm like, what am I doing? I hate this. Like, oh, I'm going to be a physical therapist. Oh, I'm going to be a chiropractor. Oh, I'm going to be whatever, right? Like, so what did you end up graduating in?
Finally, I graduated with exercise science major and a minor in psychology.
Okay. And was that at BYU, Hawaii?
Yeah.
Okay. So exercise science major, minor in psychology.
Yeah.
And that we'll talk about it here in a minute, but that ties in pretty well with what you have ended up doing career-wise.
Yeah, which is interesting because at the time when I graduated with that, I had no idea. I actually didn't even realize like that I would have the psychology minor. It was more like
that was like a final academic advisor meeting. Like, oh,
well, yeah. The academic advisor meeting was more like, so you're maxing out credits and you have to graduate. So exercise science is your closest thing. So this next semester, you have to take like these 3 classes. And so I just kind of got pushed into it.
How old were you when you graduated at BYU?
That's a good question. Like 29, I think.
Okay. Because we're kind of similar where I stopped going to school. I got my associates and then I kind of took a break and I had no idea what I wanted to do. Then I went back when I got into BYU Hawaii. And the lesson that I learned in this, and it sounds like it may have been fairly similar for you. Well, maybe it just played out that way. But I remember thinking, I have no idea what I want to do. And this is, I mean, again, we're both older at this point, right? I'm married. I have a kid. And I'm still like, what the heck do I want to do? That's a big commitment. I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I kind of thought like, ever since I was a kid, I've always done entrepreneurial stuff. And I've loved starting little businesses. I've loved selling stuff. But then what I felt inspired, or after a lot of research and pondering and thinking on things, I felt like I needed to go back to school to study something that I was passionate about and that was really true to what I felt my God-given, skill set was or whatever, not worry so much about how am I going to make money doing this, but more what comes naturally, what feels like it's in sync and in line with who I am. And so I started looking at it through that lens. And that's when I stumbled across the International Culture Studies degree at BYU Hawaii and the anthropology and communication stuff. Like I grew up moving around anyway. So I had kind of that similar experience where I had no idea. But then it was like, well, I guess this is something I'm interested in. I'm going to stop stressing. I think too many people stress long term when they're in school, when really, and maybe I'm a unique case. Maybe that's a terrible way to go about it. I guess if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you got to do things differently, right? But anyways, that's how I approached it, and it's worked out all right.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, like now that I'm sitting here and I'm like thinking about it, I think I always wanted to help people in some way.
Yeah.
And so like looking at the different things that I like took classes in, they were all trying to help people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just kind of, the stars aligned and.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to look back again, considering we'll talk more about it, but kind of what you're doing for work now and stuff. It seems to have played out just how it was supposed to. Okay. So sidestepping all this a little bit, tell me where and when did you meet Taylor, your wife?
She was going to SDSU in San Diego.
Okay.
So we met, I guess, September, got engaged, New Year's, got married on April Fool's Day.
Wow. You weren't messing around. So beginning to end, is that 6 months?
Like from the first week that we had met, we were talking about getting married. So
why was that? What clicked?
It wasn't like we were dating. It was like we were doing life together, like from the moment that we met.
And how long have you been married now?
So I think we just hit 15 years.
Dang, man. That's amazing. Yeah. That's great. So you just kind of like walked into it. Whoa, hey, wow, I really like you. And then it just kind of merged together pretty quick, huh?
I don't know. Like, it's funny you tell people and it's just like, oh, that's so crazy. But for us, it made sense. It was like when you find what you're looking for, then you just move on together. We shifted from being like two separate people to just doing everything together. I always said that she was the first one to get me out of the water, which from a surfer standpoint is not like a good thing, but she was worth missing like, oh, that extra hour of surfing to spend time with. And she gets me in the water too. It's not like, I think there's a lot of people that get married and they quit surfing and they quit doing like, I don't know, replace surfing with whatever you're passionate about. And I don't think that's a positive thing. And so, yes, she was the first thing that I thought was worth leaving the water, but yet always pushed me to get in the water.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a huge thing for me, was just that she was always so supportive of what I wanted to do. You know, at that point, it was more like a hobby, but she was also always has pushed me to do more, to be more, even though like that's was really hard for a while because I didn't know what I wanted to do.
She had your back.
She
was pushing.
Yeah, she had my back and always asked me like the right questions about, you know, my interests and, you know, kind of helping me steer me in the right direction.
So career-wise, so you graduate BYU, Hawaii. At that point, you're obviously married. And how many kids did you have when you graduated?
We had 2, Jay and Hugh.
Okay, Jay and Hugh. And then you left and you got a master's degree. Is that right?
Yeah, so I left, went to Cal State Fullerton. They were the first school that I applied to and the first one to let me know that I got in. And so I didn't even look at the others.
Convenience wins.
Yeah, but Cal State Fullerton has a really good program, and they have a lot of variety in it. And so I figured, well, if I go here, I mean, I'm in this field. I've already graduated it, but maybe I can find my niche, like what I want to do. My first semester, I took a lot of classes that were doing different things just to kind of get a glimpse into different worlds. Yeah. And I took one class from a guy named Ken Ravizza, and it was funny because so day one of class, right? It was a really small class. There's like 11 of us, right? We're sitting in a circle. So he goes around the circle and he's like, okay, I want you to introduce yourself and just, you know, say your name, where you're from, and why you're in this specific class. But so the first guy goes and they're like, well, I've read all your work. I've been following you for years. You know, I'm just like so excited to finally get the chance to learn from you. And it goes around the room. Every single one says that. And I'm like, who is this guy? Like, I don't. So I'm like, you know, finally comes to me and I'm just like, well, the title of the class seemed really interesting and like it fit my schedule. And so
again, convenience wins.
That's why I'm here. You know, and so the class was called Philosophy of Movement. And it really just studied like why, when you look at the history of the world, people are always drawn to different types of physical movements. Like, and it doesn't matter the time or the culture. People have always done different, whether it's sports or dance or, cultural things, like even martial arts, right? People of all cultures throughout all time have had these different forms of movement, and it's like this attraction to moving, and then it explored ourselves and like the different things that we've done in our own lives, and I later found out that this guy was like one of like the godfathers of sports psychology. Like,
what's his name again?
Ken Ravizza. Like, he wrote a book called Heads Up Baseball that, in my opinion, is like the most useful sports psychology book. Like, if you want to get better at sports, it's going to teach you how, as opposed to a lot of them are just like kind of theory and other things. But his is very specific as to like, this sucky thing's going to happen to you. What are you going to do about it? You know, like in the moment. And, you know, he was working with like Olympic athletes, and he was working with the Angels at the time, the baseball team. And so it was just like, oh, this guy is legit. Like, I want to do what you do.
Okay. Yeah. I just looked him up, and yeah, he's got a lot of really cool stuff out there.
So he passed away 2 years ago, but he was actually on the coaching staff of the Cubs when they won the World Series.
Wow.
And then he, you know, died a few years after that. And so,
man, what a
huge way to go out.
I mean, hindsight, right? 2020, but that's amazing that you were able to learn from him and sit down and take his class and have that as a mentor. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was really the start of like, okay, I know how I want to help people.
So how has it transitioned from that? So so we'll go with from Revisa's class. Then you get your master's degree, and the master's was in what?
So the master's was in, I guess, technically kinesiology, with an emphasis in sports psychology.
And then immediately after school, you go and do.
So even before then, like in that very first class, I was like, I'm going to find some surfers that I can help with this. I basically just like Googled if there were any surf coaches and didn't come up with too much. I was living, you know, around like the Huntington Beach area. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go to like, they have like local contests. They had I don't remember which one it was, but it was like a kind of a pro-am contest. And so I went and just kind of hung out. I don't know, got closer and closer. Like, it wasn't this big event. It was like they had like 3 pop-up tents. You know, when you're in the surfing world, like, you know, all the local pros. Well, you know who they are. And so I started talking to this guy. He's like one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. A guy named Brad Ettinger. He just started talking to me, like, you know, because I was just hanging out. And so I was asking him, you know, like, if, you know, anybody does any sort of training, any coaching. And he was like, oh, yeah, I go to this thing, you know, twice a week. And this guy named Kevin, like, here, I'll give you his phone number. And you know, and he's like, let me talk to him, and then I'll let you know when it's like safe to call. And so I waited, you know, like a day later, he was like, oh, hey, you know, I think send me a text, give Kevin a call. And I called him, and he actually knew who Ken Revisa was. He had even hired Ken to come and talk to his guys a couple years before. And so he was like, I've been looking for someone like you. So I'm like, amazing. What the heck? Like, this is crazy. Mind you, I'm taking my very first like sports psychology class. And it's not even like a sports like 101. It's like this kind of abstract, like, I don't know, you know, it's philosophy. And so I have no idea what I'm doing. All I know is whatever I learn in class, I'm going to come and like teach the same stuff to these guys. I was really shy growing up. And even now I look back and I'm like, man, that was like, for me, I'm like, that was pretty gutsy of you to just like go and put yourself out there. And it worked. Like, the very first person that I talked to trained with like the person I needed to connect with. Yeah. You know, and well, I've told people a lot, man. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and students that are, you know, wanting to be entrepreneurs. And I mean, we've hired, you know, with our agency, different people in different places to open new offices for us. And one of the things that I always say and harp on is that you have to learn to love getting in over your head. Take that analogy really literally, like, you know, getting in over your head in like water or something. The only way to survive is to learn how to swim. Right? Is to learn how to keep your head above and to breathe. And that's hard work. But when you figure it out, then you're stronger and you're better for it. Right. But I mean, over and over again in my own, you know, professional journey or entrepreneurial journey, like, it's all about just like, this is not something I would normally do. Cause I'm the same way as you. I'm an introvert. You know, growing up, I was pretty shy. Like, I wasn't out there like that. But if I turn on that, like the entrepreneurial side of my brain, like the
just kind of that hustle or whatever. I hate, it's kind of overused term, but you know what I mean? Like you just flip it on and you get in over your head. And then it's those that can get in over their head and really learn to love it, and not just love it, but then learn to thrive in that scenario. If you wouldn't have made the decision, like, you know what, I've got this idea, I'm just going to go to a competition and see, then you never meet the guy who never put you in touch with the other guy, you know. And then when you take advantage of those opportunities, more opportunities are created, right? And then what happens is you look back, like now, like you're looking back like 6, 7, 8 years later, look at the ripple effect. If I wouldn't have done that one thing and got in over my head, then all of these other things wouldn't have come into existence, right?
Not everybody that, like, say you get thrown in the water, right, and it's sink or swim, it doesn't mean that you have to become like Michael Phelps.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to not drown, you know? And so, like, in my situation, I didn't do anything crazy. Like, for me, it seemed like a big step, but I mean, all I did was like go and hang out, you know, and I happened to stand next to somebody else who was really friendly and just like a genuinely nice person that was like, how are you?
Let's talk story.
You know, like, and so we just started talking, and, you know, and so one thing led to another. But I think a lot of times, like, in that, like, people feel like they have to be Michael Phelps, when the reality is it's just like baby steps, you know. It's just taking one stroke and figuring out, like, what's the simplest way to keep my head above water.
Yep.
You know, like, how can I keep my head above water using the least amount of energy, you know, so that I can survive until I'm rescued or whatever.
Yeah.
But yet I think so many people, myself included, think that we have to be, you know, the very best before we can even swim.
Yeah. But then when you really look at Michael Phelps, which ironically just this last week, my boys are on swim team right now, and I showed them a video on YouTube that was all of Michael Phelps' gold medal wins. And so I was actually thinking about it with them. I'm like, man, like this is the absolute pinnacle of what he can do professionally, right? Or as an athlete. Like he did it, but I mean, you just don't see all of the training and preparation it took to get there. Yeah. And you just don't see, you know, when he's 10 years old or whatever, and he's nervous and he's, you know, like doesn't want to be like the new kid in the swim team, but he jumps in and he does it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying is opportunities capitalized on create more opportunities. And then eventually, like professionally and in a career or something, then you get a little more choosy with the opportunities that you want to take advantage of, right? But early on, it's like, no, I'm just going to show up to this thing. Oh, what do you know? This guy talked to me. Oh, he said he'd put me in touch with this guy. And then there's an opportunity. So you have the opportunity to reach out to him and talk to him, and then, you know, leverage that for, and again, I think the big key here in what I've seen and knowing you, and then also just hearing your journey, is it comes down to wanting to provide value and help people. Because if your core motivation is pure and the intent is clear, then you see good things happen, right? If you were thinking like, how can I leverage this person I'm talking to make some money? Like, screw him, I just want to meet the guy he knows.
Yeah.
Right. Then that tends to not go as well. And if it does, then shame on you anyway, you know? But anyways, I just like that process, right? That getting in over your head and then taking advantage of opportunities, and then those opportunities create more opportunities, and so on and so forth. So yeah, good example of that. Like
I spent the next, 3 years working with, this guy's name's Kevin Dean, right? His company, Dean Sports Consultants, and or DSC, right? And he was similar to me in that, so he was a physical therapist, had some friends that were like, in that like pro-am level of surfing, that was like, I can help you. Like, let's start doing these trainings, right? From a physical aspect outside of the water that just grew and grew because, he was actually helping people. And so he was helping, these first guys. And so more guys wanted in on it, until it became 2 separate locations and, training all the best guys in like that Southern California area.
So again, the opportunities continued to come, right? So, I mean, were you a part of that kind of that growth into the new locations and stuff?
So, I mean, kind of. I mean, I came to the table and was like, you're training the body. Can I train the mind of these guys? And he's like, yes, please. And so I started training with them as well, right? So I would do the physical stuff. And then basically afterwards, we would just, do different, basically, what did I learn, on Tuesday?
Yeah.
Now we're going to do on Wednesday. And so it just was like, and I think that was probably the best thing for me was just to apply it almost immediately, because then it became like, instead of, trying to remember back to like, what I learned in school, it just became like, kind of part of who I was and what I did, and just trying to help these guys to be more successful.
And that's it goes back to that teaching skill though, that your mom saw early and that I mentioned at the very beginning is it's a unique skill set to be able to take information you learned yesterday, digest it, and then be able to present it in a way that is digestible to somebody else, right? And can provide value to them. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, and my whole thing has always been like, knowledge is only as useful as you can use it. Like,
so it doesn't help to have all this knowledge on X, Y, or Z if you never tap into it or use it, right?
Yeah, and so my approach has always been like, I don't care if you like completely understand the theories and things. Like, let's just give you something very simple to do so that you can perform.
Yeah.
And let's try to understand like what's stopping you and what's blocking your ability to perform, and then do something about it.
Can you walk me through what that looks like? Just obviously you don't have to go into all the detail, but simply like with surfers, when you were working with these surfers, what kind of stuff were you teaching them to help their, the mental aspect of their...
So at first, the biggest thing was pay attention, right? Pay attention to what's helping you and what's hindering you, right? So like get a glimpse of what's helpful and what's not, and start to recognize, and what I mean by that is like, what are the thoughts going through your head that most of the time we're unaware of? It's just like, I sucked that heat, but there's a reason why. Some of it's physical, like maybe you didn't sleep well last night. So maybe if you didn't sleep well last night, then we need to help teach you different things so that you can sleep better the night before, right? Or maybe it was something in the moment, like, so-and-so got an 8 and I only had a 5. We had 6 minutes left. And so I was just like, I got to beat this guy. Where's the wave? And so I'm, their mind starts speeding up, whatnot, right? So there's a million different things that happen to people. But the first step for me was always just exploring that and recognizing that everyone's different. And so you can't come to an athlete and be like, here's the answer, because you could get lucky and you might have the answer for that person, but really everyone is so different that you have to understand who they are, and they have to understand who they are first.
So pay attention. It's like be present, and don't allow your thoughts or emotions or whatever it is. Don't just like passively let them influence you for one way or the other, but to actually notice and pay attention to each individual thought, feeling, emotion, whatever. Is that what you're saying? Like in the moment?
Yeah. So there's a difference between like passive, because you can, at this stage, you can passively let them go by because your thoughts and emotions and everything are going to influence you. But it's just like kind of taking a step back and looking at them. So like if, let's say something happens and it makes you angry, right? And that anger causes you to make poor decisions. It's not about changing it at this stage. It's just about recognizing that, this is something that happens to me.
One of the things that I do, and I talk to my team a lot about this at MWI, when I'm in the thick of it and there's a bunch of real tough decisions to be made, or an angry customer that needs to be communicated with, or a tough employee situation, or whatever, or even like a lot of really good news comes in all at once, and you're trying to digest it, whatever. I always say take a step back. In my mind's eye, what I'm actually doing is taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and then I can kind of see everything. And I know that I don't literally see it, right? But I can see the options, and I can see the consequences of these decisions, whatever. And And then when you're in that state of mind, then you can make the correct decision, and not always, right? More often than not, I probably don't, and I, let whatever emotion or something get the best of you. But I like that idea of taking a step back, looking at everything that's coming in, all of the different, stimuli or whatever that are coming in, and then figuring out what's my response going to be to this. Is that kind of the right idea?
Yeah. So many people want the change so fast. And so it's hard to get people to slow down because they just want to implement. But before implementing, like, you have to know the right strategy. I think about, like, my mom, she is like a superstar at making salsa, right? And so and it's not like she follows some recipe. I mean, she knows what ingredients to put in, but then she, gets some chips out and tastes it, right? Oh, it needs more salt. Oh, it needs more pepper. It needs more of whatever. Right. And so she makes those adjustments, but she can't make those adjustments until she tastes it. And so people just tend to want the results. And so they want, like, give me the strategy, give me the technique, like, oh, I'll try everything. But it's like, I don't know, it's like throwing darts, blindfolded, doing it that way. Whereas if you take a step back and just try to understand yourself a little bit better, there's a kind of a confusion between, like, positive and negative, as well as like productive and counterproductive, or like helpful and unhelpful. Because for some people, getting angry, right? Negative emotion is helpful in, like, say, like a competitive surfing situation, right? It might give them an adrenaline spike, increase their energy, and their style of surfing might match that, right? For somebody else, that might be the most detrimental thing ever, right? Because maybe they're more flowy and smooth, And so many people just want to bypass that step. And it's also the hardest. The hardest step is to look at yourself. Like, people don't like looking in the mirror to see their flaws.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, as you're saying this, and I'm thinking of athletes right now, but I'm thinking of, are you a basketball fan?
I'm not. I'm a whatever the opposite is.
Whatever the opposite of basketball
Yeah,
is?
no, I got swindled into playing basketball and tore my ACL.
Oh, so you have
it's
a bitterness.
No, I had nothing against basketball. I'm just short, and so
I'm just thinking of one of the big comparisons you always hear is, like, Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or LeBron James. That's like the annoying debate in basketball, is always, who's the greatest? Who's the GOAT? Right? They always talk about that. And recently, I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. Did you watch that?
No.
You need to watch it, dude. Like, I know basketball, whatever, but you'll enjoy this sports psychology part of it. Because Michael Jordan was a beast, and he would get mad. He would get, like, really angry at his teammates if they didn't show up. And the practices were not fun, right? They were, like, angry, yelling and cussing. And a lot of his teammates post-career, he won 6 championships. He never lost in a championship series. Like, he was the man, right? But nobody liked him. Like, his teammates were like, I respect him. He was a good dude. But his anger led him to be a competitive monster that would not lose. But the big comparison, Kobe Bryant was very similar to that, Kobe Bryant. But then the comparison is interesting with LeBron James, because LeBron James is seen as much more, he's super competitive, but he's never angry. Like, Michael Jordan's teammate would shoot an important shot and miss it, and the reaction would be like Michael Jordan staring his teammate down and giving him a dirty glare, and then in the locker room after telling him he's a screw up. You know what I mean? Like, trying to motivate him to be better in practice. Whereas LeBron James puts his arm around the guy who just lost him the championship or whatever, and walks off the court with them, kind of motivating him and talking to him in, like, a much more calm way. So it's kind of interesting how you see these athletes. You see both, right? And it's not that one's better than the other, but like you said, some people motivate themselves differently. So jumping forward a little bit, now you're a contractor for the Army, right? On Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, and you work with soldiers now, right? So you're not working with athletes. I mean, but you're working with soldiers. What is that transition like, and what do you do now in your day-to-day? So, like, in sports psychology, there's, like, this certificate that you can get, like, just like this certification. And so I was looking for somebody else to kind of, because you have to have, like, a supervisor, right? So I was looking for somebody who's certified, and there never was anybody in Hawaii, because we came straight back here after grad school. And so I saw that there was one here. And so I contacted him. We met up, had lunch. He explained to me that he had just started at Schofield with this big military contract,
And I'm like, so are they hiring? Because like the military is like, it's a big deal and means a little bit more to survive combat than to win a heat. And so I think at that stage, I was just like looking for something more, a way to help people, maybe to matter a little bit more. I'm not sure. And so they had just opened up here. And so he told me about it. I applied to the program and got hired on, but they didn't have any options here. So went to North Carolina, worked at Fort Bragg for little over a year, which was amazing because I was working with the special operations as they went through their training and just got to see a lot of stuff from a viewpoint that very few people get to see.
Yeah.
Most of the people that get to see it are going through the training. Kind of got this like fly on the wall view of like all the training that special operations get. And,
was that completely eye-opening and shocking to you, or was it? What was your reaction?
So yes, they're both. Like there were a lot of things that were like super eye-opening. There was like pinch myself, like, is this real? Am I really here? But then a lot of the stuff that like, I don't know, movies and media portrays of, like the military and whatnot. The biggest surprise to me was that soldiers I don't know why I was surprised, but soldiers are people first.
Yeah.
And they come in all shapes, all sizes, all cultures, all colors, all backgrounds. And it was just awesome to see. Like, I remember this one testing situation. These guys were, being tested on like a radio system. And they basically walk in, there's two people that go at a time, and they're standing there, and there's a radio in front of them. There's like a timer. They have to do something with the radio, right? And there's a guy who's 6'9" and just like a physical beast. And right next to him, a guy that was probably like 5'4", 5'5", just this kind of stocky little guy.
Yeah.
And like the 6'9" guy, his waist was at this other guy's shoulders. And I just, it was kind of this moment for me where I realized both these guys have to do the exact same thing. And they can, like they're here, they've proven themselves. And it was just like, I think that was a very eye-opening moment. Like it kind of doesn't matter what you bring to the table, as long as you have kind of the backing. Yeah, I learned a lot of stuff, but that was one of the big moments for me. And it was just this very simple thing. But
well, on the surface, you would look at these two physical specimens, you say, oh, they're completely different. I mean, that's the easy judgment to make, right? 6'9", 5'5", built, not built, whatever it might be. But in that situation, obviously there's certain things that the guy that's 6'9" is going to be much better suited for, right? But in that situation where it comes down to training and study and preparation and understanding and knowledge of this tool or radio system or whatever, at that point, who cares, right? Who cares who's huge? I mean, that's an interesting lesson to learn. Obviously, if it had to do with some physical lift this much weight, I'm sure the big guy is going to be a little more prepared to do it. But
yeah, but any of the standards, like they all have standards, like very hard, rigorous physical standards that they all have to do. And I think, sure, it's a lot of them are probably easier for the big guy. But I think the movies kind of portray like special operations as kind of this one thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is physical. And what I saw was just very different from that.
A lot more technical details.
Yeah, there are some super hardcore, dedicated little people. Or like you would see them and think like, oh, this is just an average person. But yet, for some reason, they're able to do just as much, if not more, than these like big, gnarly, like, kind of the stereotypical what you would think about.
So now in Hawaii, so you went to North Carolina for a little bit, and then how did you end up getting back to Schofield?
Yeah, so basically,
for anybody that doesn't know, by the way, Schofield Barracks is an Army post on the island of Oahu, right?
Yeah, so we went to North Carolina because it was a step in the right direction career-wise, but we always knew that we wanted to raise our kids in Hawaii. And so I was just always in connection with the guys back here. And so as soon as they had an opening, I jumped on it. I thought we were going to be there for a couple years, just kind of the way that it typically works. But I got lucky and they had an opening just after I was there for a year. And so headed back to Hawaii and, been here for another 5 years.
So are you training combat guys or special ops guys or whoever it is that you're training? Are you training them before they get deployed and after they come back, or just one or the other, or how does that work?
All of the above. So now, like with this job, it's like this huge Army contract. There's like 200 of us all over, the world. And so it's not like it's me, so I'm following this program, but it's the Ready and Resilient Performance Center, right? So at Schofield is who I work through. We're basically an asset to the Army in Hawaii. It's hard to answer that question because we'll work with everybody. So some of the things that we've worked with in the past, they have a competitive culinary team who wins everything every year. So they're the best one in all of the Army, like all the U.S. military, like not just the Army. And we work with they have a pre-ranger course, like getting guys ready to go to ranger school.
And are you doing actual sit down classes? Come to this place at this time and we're going to teach you? Or is it more like you're in there with them while they're doing stuff and you're coaching and mentoring? Or how does that work? Yeah,
we do everything from one-on-one, like people can come into our office and meet with us one-on-one, to yesterday I met with, there's a new group of the pre-ranger guys that just finished a 6-mile ruck where they're carrying a bunch of weight and having to do it under a certain time. And so I was talking to them afterwards for 15 minutes. But then there's also courses where it's 2 weeks long. We have 50 people in the course, learning about resilience, and that gets a lot deeper. And so we do a lot of different things, from individuals to small groups to large groups.
Tell me the overarching, high level, 30,000 foot view. What is the gist of the training that you give to these soldiers? And what is this mental fortitude, this mental strength aspect? Yeah.
So like I mentioned, and we've talked about pretty extensively, paying attention, understanding how you function, right, is step one. Step two is then giving them various techniques, such as breathing, right? Breathing is a very hot topic right now, because it works, right? So we train them on how and when to breathe effectively to, calm themselves down if need be. We teach them how to leverage their thinking. So kind of that next step after they understand how they function, then you can start to take a little bit of control of it, right? So there's preventative measures that you can recognize that this thing acts as a trigger to, cause problems for me. So before that occurs, when I anticipate it, here's the technique, right? So some of that is just having strategic thoughts. Some of it is even just a distraction, right? Or avoidance of certain things. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we give them these strategies of basically how they can approach the tendencies that they know that they have. And then the next step is give them opportunities to practice it and follow up with them to understand how it's going. And that's really where the magic happens, because then people can say oh, it kind of worked, but here was a problem. And so then you can tweak things. And the less cookie cutter you are, the better, because nobody's the same and there's not an answer for everyone. And so one of the biggest things, in my approach has been getting to know people and understanding them and just, and helping them understand themselves. Because without doing that, you're not going to be able to really tap into the nuances of what makes them function at a high level. Because it's way easier. It's way easier to go in there and be like, here you go. Here's, 6 strategies. Go.
Well, that's awesome, man. I want to transition. So much of what you have done, now that we've talked literally about from when you were a kid all the way to now, right, working, doing your job. And the reason that I thought about you and wanted to reach out to you as it pertains to this podcast is because when I think of all of this, what do you call the process of the trainings that you do, whether it be with the surfers or the military? Mental... I call it mental toughness. This mental toughness, right, that you have studied and learned as it pertains to athletics, as it pertains to military, but also as a dad, as a father, as a husband, husband. I'm sure you use these strategies a lot and all the time, and it's kind of ingrained in you now. And so I know recently you and Taylor and your family as a whole has faced huge tragedy, and I want to talk about my boy Griff, and I want to kind of roll a lot of what you've talked about into trials and hope, and how in the face of some of the greatest trials that you can face and exist in a lifetime, right? How you can face those trials with any semblance of hope and optimism and ambition, right? Coming out of those. So to take a step back, I want to talk about adopting Griff and kind of the background there. If you could give us some context to that and introduce us to Griff.
Yeah. So Taylor and I, both of us, like growing up, even before we met each other, always wanted to have kids and, big family. And so then when we met each other and we fell in love, and that was always part of the equation, was like, to have this big family, lots of kids, lots of crazy and everything that comes with it. And then we struggled to get pregnant. And it wasn't like, I know people that have struggled for a lot longer than us, but when you're young, 2 years seems like forever, right? Mm-hmm. And so the problem actually wasn't getting pregnant, it was staying pregnant. And so Taylor had a bunch of miscarriages, and then finally, Jay was born, and then we had another miscarriage, and then Hugh was born. On top of that, Taylor basically lost, I think it was 5 or 10 pounds when she was full term with Jay. And for anybody that knows her, she's not the kind of person that can lose any kind of weight.
She's not very big. Other end of that spectrum, you're supposed to have gained 20 or 30 pounds at that point. Right?
Yeah. And then with Hugh, she only gained 15 pounds. And so her body has a really hard time being pregnant, and she's very sick and all these issues. And so we got pregnant with our third, and, things seemed fine, but then her water broke at 22 weeks. And so basically the doctors are like, there's not really anything we can do. We'll, just make you comfortable, but you will go into labor and deliver this baby, and babies don't survive, being born this premature.
You said it was 22 weeks?
Yeah. And so he was born, and surprisingly, he was alive, but only, he was, could fit in my hand, and, only lived for maybe 5 minutes. And that was a huge blow to us. I think the miscarriages were kind of like little hits. Mm-hmm. But then we had 2 kids, and so it was like, okay, we're getting these little hits, but we're still winning. Yeah. And then with Walt is what we named him. It was a lot bigger of a blow, and I was in grad school at the time, and, we had a lot going on. And the doctors were saying, don't get pregnant anymore. This is going to kill you, to Taylor. And that was hard to hear, because, we had this expectation that we were going to have a bunch of kids, and had become kind of part of our identity. And even though we only had 2 at the time. And so with them saying, don't have any more, we were like, well, okay, there's other ways to get kids, right? So then we started looking into adoption, and long story short, Griff was born, about a year later, and it was very last minute. We got a call, there's a baby due tomorrow, that's interested in placing with you guys. Are you interested? And we're in California at the time. They're in Atlanta, Georgia. Mm-hmm. We prayed about it and thought about it, and that night, and then called them back the next day, and they're like, yeah, well, we're interested. And so we flew out there. Taylor's sister lived there at the time, so we stayed with them. And he was a week late. We got there and met his birth mom. Everything just felt right about it. And so she went into labor. She actually had her labor was super short. By the time they told us she's going into labor, so basically inviting us, you can hang out at the hospital if you want. And he was born by the time we got there. Yeah, so we were there, an hour after he was born. And then it was kind of an odd experience, but, we got in one car and left with the baby, and she got in another and left and went home. But we've maintained a relationship with her over the years. And we've eventually met his birth father as well. And that was a really special experience because it was like an extension of our family, having them join our family and us joining theirs. And it was originally supposed to be like a closed adoption, but it morphed into something else that became really special.
Was that a decision that you and Taylor made, or how did that happen?
I don't really even know. Taylor would probably have more details on it.
More organic, kind of.
But yeah, it just happened.
You lived in California at the time, and then Griff is going strong, and he's born, and then you guys moved back to Hawaii pretty soon thereafter, right?
Yeah, so shortly after that, moved back to Hawaii, and then, yeah, just going, going with life, and everything's fine, and, did the North Carolina thing, came back here, and then shortly after moving back, I mean, it wasn't a year, but it was probably like 8 months after we moved back. Then Griff, just out of the blue, had a stroke. And it's just weird because like kids don't have strokes, it's like old people kind of thing. And, he was 4 and he had just been to the doctor. Like he has what's called, it's a sickle cell beta thalassemia. I don't know. It's a potentially dangerous disease, but the beta thalassemia typically doesn't have many issues at all. Like a lot of people go throughout their lives and they don't even know that they have it because it's just like not a problem. But since we knew that he had it, every 6 months he would have a checkup and test his blood, and every time they're like, yep, he's good, and this time they're like, you know what, come back in a year. He's been good up to this point. Typically around like 4 or 5 is an indication of how they'll be for the rest of their lives.
Okay.
Right. So he hasn't had any issues. Good to go. See you in a year. And it was a week later, he ends up having this stroke. And, so he's in the hospital for like 2 months and Taylor's, basically living there. And I'm still trying to work and, deal with the other kids. And that was a hard time. We didn't know if he was going to survive. There was a lot up in the air, and the doctors are saying like one of the symptoms of stroke is more strokes. And this one was so bad that he probably will not survive another stroke. And so they did some brain surgeries to help. He had 2, like one on each side. Then we connected with the Make-A-Wish people. and so we did a Make-A-Wish trip, but the doctors are like, go soon. Because we don't know, something's probably going to happen. And
they thought there's going to be another stroke. I mean, it just like signs led them to believe that it wasn't done.
Yeah. And so he had seizures and like all this other just like crazy brain stuff going on that was not super stable, and he lost his ability to walk and his eyesight and his hearing and like all this it was just crazy. And like all the stuff that you don't ever want to see your child experience. It was like all of them. But he gained his sight back and he gained his hearing back and he relearned how to walk and his right side was hit pretty heavily. And so, I mean, him and like his arm was always like kind of clenched and, and he was originally right-handed. And so he had to do everything with his left hand and he could walk, but, you could definitely hear him coming.
Yeah.
Because he kind of had that clumpy foot.
And he could talk. He regained his ability to talk, but it was
limited.
Limited.
It was, he probably said, I don't know, maybe 10 words that most people could understand. And then I'd probably guess like 50 probably more than that, but like no more, I would say, than like 100 things that we understood that not really
got his point across.
Many other people. Yeah, he knew how to communicate. He was really good at charades. He did not want to do sign. Like Taylor was a sign language interpreter, so she would teach him stuff and he just would like take bits and pieces, but he wanted to be normal. He wanted to be like everybody else. And so he wanted to communicate, with his voice. And so he did as best he could. And, and things were tough for a while as he was rehabbing. And then we decided like, you know what, like we don't want his life to be spent in rehab and in doctor's offices. So let's just do stuff, and like you said at the beginning, like we're very active and, outside a lot and doing hikes and, at the beach and all this. And so we got to a point where we just quit doing all of he kept going to the doctors and he had to have, blood transfusions like every 6 weeks, but we stopped doing all the therapy stuff. And as soon as we stopped doing that, he just started to thrive and he started to grow and to learn how to do stuff a lot better than at the therapy. That was like, the point was to get him to be able to do all those things, from like a physical standpoint. And he was still doing some at school, but he started to just live, and he played soccer, although not very much. But he just did everything that his brothers and his sister, were doing.
Anybody that knew Griff, he had an ability to just love seemingly unconditionally and just to bring love and just this joy and happiness and just life. He just brought this presence of, I'm living my best life right now to the room. Yeah. And he would walk in and it wasn't just like, oh, the Pierces are here. It was like, there's Griff. I spent limited time with him, but over the years, just, off and on at events and things, but it was always like, he saw you and he made sure, you just knew right away, like, he's here and he's alive and he's loving everybody. Yeah. And I've always wondered how or what you attribute. I think I've been most impressed. I mean, not most impressed, but just so impressed with your other kids, right? Because we didn't mention Rhett in this. How old is Rhett? Your youngest?
She's 6.
6. So your kids had this amazing relationship and bond with Griff, right? As their sibling, but also as their special needs sibling but I never saw any like, babying or anything like that. It was just kind of like, he's our brother and he's here to play and he's here to be a part of of what we're doing. I mean, how is that something you taught? How did you instill that level of understanding and hope and optimism for Griff to your other kids?
I think that came from Griff. To be honest, like, I think that he's the one that didn't want help all the time, and like coming out of the rehab and everything, he hated it. But he still was very limited in what he was able to do, but he still wanted to figure it out on his own, and so he would let his siblings know, like, it's not about me finishing this, right? Because Jay and Hugh all the time, especially at the beginning, they wanted to be helpful, right? And so they would jump in and try to help, right? To like shorten the amount of time between like starting and finishing, but yet he would let them know that he didn't want their help. Like, it wasn't about getting to the finish line. It was about doing it himself. And so I think he taught them and us to the point where we would, okay, it's on you, and we would, because some of the stuff, like physically, you'd have to be careful so he's not gonna like hurt himself. Yeah. But we would still allow him to do it, but just take whatever precautions. Like the kid wanted to skateboard.
Yeah, just for some context, you've got Jay and Hugh who are just active, right? Like they're not just active, but they're really good on a surfboard and really good on a skateboard, and they go hard. They're not. Yeah, they're not just, they're going hard. And so Griff's just watching them, right? And has this examples of these two big brothers that are just like, they take the bull by the horns and they love doing stuff and they're really good at it, right? So he has these examples to look up to.
Yeah. And so he wants to join the fun, right? And so at first they're very like, oh, come here, Griffey, like, let me help you. And he's like, get your hands off of me. Like, I'm doing this myself. And so we're like, okay, well, you've got, shoes, shin guards, knee pads, elbow pad, like the whole gauntlet of pads. And, and he did a lot, he's never super great at it, but
he didn't care. He
didn't care. Yeah. And it's funny, like hearing you talk earlier about surfing and like going out early in the morning because you don't want people to see, like, Griff didn't care if he fell in front of you. Like, he was the first one to laugh at himself when he did fall. And like you say, living his best life, like living his best life did not mean being successful. It just meant doing what he wanted to do and not caring like what anybody else thought. And that included talking about Richie, him and Richie had this very special bond. And it didn't matter if he just saw Richie an hour ago. And it wasn't just Richie, but there were certain people that when he saw them, he didn't care who was around. He was hooting and hollering and squealing and running, to give you the biggest hug ever. And I think that's been one of the biggest things for me that I still fail to implement, but that I feel like I want to do more, is like when I feel the urge to respond in a certain way with laughter or caring or making a big scene because you're excited to see someone, like not holding back. But as an adult, and even you see it in like my kids, that are, getting kind of that teenage level, like holding back because what are other people going to think about me? And I think Griff, taught me a huge lesson of like, who cares? Because the only person that matters right now is that person that I'm excited to see, that person that I care about, and if I want to respond excitedly or whatnot, like go do it.
Yeah.
Let them know that you care.
Yeah. And that is a very full circle, because that's what I told the story of how that hindered me, right? That ego and that worry about what other people might think. But that's a real common thing that, like you said, if you could just let that go, I think you'd love harder and you'd show people more emotion, and that you could really, really help everybody, I think, to be able to care a little bit less about what the person next to them is going to think, and to be a little more confident and let go of that ego a little bit. So obviously, we're talking about Griff. And so it's been a number of months now since Griff passed away. And it was, from what I've understood, we lived just up the street when all of this happened. And man, I don't know that I've ever seen a community come together. The community came together not because it was like, hey, let's come together to make Taylor and Chris feel good, right? Obviously, you have a lot of people that love and care about you, but that wasn't the reason. It was genuinely and sincerely because of who Griff was, that the community came together in a way that was just so inspiring. And people that had only ever met Griff once, or had only seen Griff from a distance at the beach or something, they were impacted by him, and he had left his mark. There's just not very many examples that I know of in my own life. And I think a lot of people that get a chance to listen, to understand the impact that an 8-year-old can have on a family, a neighborhood, a community, an island, and honestly, the world at this point, with some of the impact that his story has had on people. How have you been able to find hope through this whole process?
Well, I think it started with when Griff initially had the stroke, and the doctors are telling us that it's unlikely for him to survive, and they're like, we don't know, but it could be, tomorrow, it could be 6 months, it could be a year. Like they were doubtful that he would survive.
This was the initial stroke?
Yeah, the initial stroke. Okay. They were, 4 years ago. It's hard for them to judge, but they weren't sure that he would make it a year. And then he got to this point where it was like, okay, like everything's working, like he's beating the odds. He's doing really well. And as a parent, it's really hard to explain, but you get to a point, and I think also this has to do with like my relationship with God and feeling like it's okay. It's okay if he's not with us. Like that there's a bigger picture, and that's like nearly impossible to get to as a parent, but to recognize that like that God has a hand in this. And Taylor and I both had this experience like separately, years ago, where we understood, we both felt very strongly that Griff was going to stay with us until it was unexpected, until he wasn't like sick anymore. And, and that was like sometime around the time that we also decided like, we got to live. Like we can't just like live in this, bubble of like being cautious, but like, let's like, that's not living, let's do stuff and let's experience things. And so I think that was really the start of recognizing that like every moment, is precious. And like, it sounds cliche, but when you've got a kid that you don't know if he's going to wake up in the morning, it makes tucking him in special, and it makes tucking your other kids in special. Like, they're not sick, but you just don't know, what the future will hold. And so I think that one of the huge blessings, like, it was hard going through all of this stuff, like so hard on Griff, hard on us. But I think one of the biggest things was like having that understanding that like every moment means something, and every moment might be the last, and then we got to a point where it became, I don't want to say became less special, but it became like he's doing well. Like, we don't have to worry so much because all the medical treatments and everything was going really, really well. And he was thriving, and he was making huge gains, like cognitively and at school and physically. And, he was growing and, in so many different aspects. His speech was just improving like crazy. And then he had this, the more recent stroke that just destroyed his brain. And basically he passed out after a wonderful day at the beach. Like, it was just, we just had like a nice family beach day, came home, and looking back, it was almost as if he knew something was going on, just because. So I haven't told everybody this, and we didn't even know until his teacher told us that on Friday. So he typically raced his sister to the flagpole, and it was like their little competition, like who would get there first. And so he was always like the first one out of the classroom and, trying to win. And they said this Friday, he waited till he was like the last one and then gave like all his teachers a hug. And then he, left, and they were like, well, that was weird. Like, he's never done that before. Usually and then so then he left, but left his backpack like at the top of the stairs of the class and went back in and gave each of them a hug again. And then he left. And then it was the next day that, he had the stroke. And so that night, he basically went unconscious. And so we rushed him to the hospital, and he never woke up from that. I know your question was about like how he's left the impact, but I think that for us, he left that impact when we realized that like every moment is special and every moment, might be the last. And so we started to live more, right? And so we went to, thanks to Taylor realizing this and like pushing it, we did the Make-A-Wish trip. We went to Thailand and Malaysia and the Philippines. We went to Europe, like England, where did we go? France, Portugal, Spain, Italy, then we went to Bali. Like, we've done all these things because Griff had this impact on us. Mm-hmm. Like, we were not travelers before. Like, I've been to like 5 states, And so like I grew up in a little town. Like, I was always comfortable just being a homebody. But because of the impact Griff had on us, we decided to like go do more. And so that was just on us. And then after he passed away, you start to see, and people tell you much more directly, but you start to see that he had an impact on others as well. And like we've talked about how excited he would get, for seeing certain people or doing certain activities. He also had this way of being just like compassionate. Like, he couldn't communicate like everybody else, but he knew how to comfort somebody when they were sad. Like, he could tell when somebody was having a hard time, and he would, give them a hug, rub their back, like these little things that usually kids don't pick up on. Seeing the community and thousands of messages, either letters written, Instagram direct messages on Facebook, text messages, phone calls, art that people have made. I don't know of any that have come as just like we're so sorry. It's all come with, I'm so sorry. And he had this impact on me, or like a specific story about like, and usually it was like small daily things that we had no idea about, like people we didn't even know. Like, my son was in Griff's class and he was having a hard time, and he didn't want to go to school. And, when he got there, he saw Griff, and Griff came and put his arm around him, and like walked to class together. And just so many of these stories where he was just so compassionate and kind to people.
He had a special way with babies. He loved babies. And he would come into a room and he would spot the baby and he would go and he'd give the baby a kiss. And and again, a lot of times when a little kid's coming up to your kid and getting in their face, you're like, hey, keep your distance a little bit. With Griff, there was none of that. It was like, Griff, come love on my baby. My wife posted her last memory when Griff passed away and when we had heard the news. And she said, my last memory of Griff was him taking Della, who is our 15-month-old at the time. She was, a year old. My last memory of Griff was him taking Della's cheeks in his hands, giving her a kiss on her head and blessing her with his magic smile. And that happened with so many people. And I remember just that pure love that emanated from him to come he didn't know Della. He probably recognized us, from life in the community, but he just walked up to our little 1-year-old and grabbed her cheeks in his hands and looked straight at her and gave her a kiss on the head and just walked away. You know what I mean? Those are all of the things that you and Taylor maybe didn't even see, just the impact that he had on so many people and the lessons that he taught anybody that came in contact with him, whether it be when you're looking at how tough the hand was that he was dealt and the strength and optimism that he approached it with, or the way that he loved compassionately and without any sort of, like we said before, ego. And man, what a life lived. I think so many people would give anything to have an impact in 80 years that he had in 8. Through this, what gives you hope, especially, and again, I'm looking at like your family and with Rhett, I know it's been really hard, and the kids, I'm sure this has been really, really difficult. Looking past all of this and knowing that you're going to carry this amazing experience that you had being a dad in this life and in the future to Griff, what gives you hope? What's helped pull you guys out of darkness that I'm sure came? And
yeah, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. It's hard to say like, oh, it's this, like whether like a moment or because I think with hope is also darkness. Like if everything's fine, then you don't really need to hope for anything because like things are great. Anybody who's experienced loss, can attest to the darkness that you experience. And from what I understand, like that darkness doesn't go away, but there is also light. I think there's some Dumbledore quote about like, if, you can always find hope if you like learn to turn on the light, or so. I'm butchering that, but the gist of it is sometimes it's very dark and all you have, is a little starlight. And other times the sun comes out, and it feels like you don't have much control over that. But I think recognizing that, I think Richie always says like, it's a tunnel, it's not a cave. And I think like, how corny or whatever that sounds like, it's true. But at the same time, sometimes you're in the tunnel forever, or for a very, very long time. And so I would say personally for me, I think it's different for everyone. Taylor and I and the kids, like we each have our own separate grieving, experiences. Anyway, so to try to give you somewhat of an answer, I think that trying to live like Griff gives me meaning in his life and in his death. Like somebody's got to keep that going. Like if he came and went, we learned stuff from him, but we don't actually apply any of it, then what was it for? So I think trying to do that every day is something that helps. I had some very special experiences, throughout Griff's life, but also like in the hospital, because he had the stroke and was admitted on, leap year, the 29th of February. And then he passed away on March 4th. And in that time, a lot of people were able to visit him, but there were also a lot of times where it was just us there. And there were very clear experiences that I had, like with Griff. It's really hard to explain, like almost like out of body experiences where like I knew that Griff was okay. And if we talk about like religion, and like I have beliefs that, that this life has purpose, and, and that we will live again. But I think conceptually, it's easy to just kind of believe that. But until you experience loss, it's not really tested, and I feel like, I don't know that it was tested so much, but I had very clear experiences that I know that Griff is still with us, that he is in a better place, that he is like, I wish that he was still here. Like I wish none of this happened. I wish that I could see him grow up. And it's very sad. But at the same time, there is that, small starlight mid the darkness that lets me see that he left this legacy so that we could implement it, and I can see that he is okay, and that we will be okay. And just, it's hard to explain. And it's like the darkness and the light are both there. And I think the hope really goes back to the two things of knowing that I will see him again, as well as knowing that I need to live in a way that his legacy or whatever like moves on.
Yeah.
And I hope that everybody that has met him or that has known him tries to implement, like, be a little bit kinder, like pay attention to the people around you, and recognize that everyone's going through stuff. And if you can just show some empathy and just care, you're going to make the world a better place. Who cares what other people think? You want to be excited and happy? Do it. Drop the ego and just live.
I know this is a lot to dive into, and I appreciate you taking a couple hours. I am inspired by you and Taylor. And honestly, again, I look up to you guys a lot. We love you guys. And Griff, there's no question that I'll never, ever, ever forget Griff and what he taught, us. And I know thousands, like you said, of others have felt the same way. So thank you so much, Chris, for talking and telling the story, and really great for me to go back to and listen to, and something that I'll always appreciate. So thanks so much for taking some time.
I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's both hard to talk about, but I think it's good for me to talk about it from a therapeutic standpoint. I don't know. Yeah, it's good for me to cry every now and again. And so I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and it's been good.
Good. Appreciate it. So thanks so much for taking some time. Good. What are you working on right now? So it's kind of sidestepping a little bit, but I know that recently you had some things in the works that we had talked about with, are you still working on any of that in particular? Is there anything other than your day-to-day job that you're working on? Is there anything else you're doing?
Nothing that I'm going gung-ho on.
I got to get one of these things gung-ho, man.
Yeah, I know. Like the whole COVID thing, and with Griff, it's like everything's kind of just come to a screeching halt. Not in particular.
Keep me posted when you do. I know we've talked about stuff in the past, but I love all this stuff. And I think that just you as a teacher and as somebody who's gained a lot of knowledge and experience and wisdom and expertise, I mean, just throughout your personal life and career, there's a lot of good that can be had from this. And I know you naturally are good at it, but if there's anything down the road that you're working on, man, let me know. I would love to help out in any way that I can.
Well, I would say that, like, for anybody listening to this, like, if you're going to take something from it, I would hope both from the Griff side and from my work side is pay attention, and with the hope side, because there were so many miracles. And I hate to say it, it sounds weird. Okay. So in Griff's last days, there were a lot of miracles that happened. Maybe not the one that we wanted to happen, but there were a lot of miracles, and we felt, both Taylor and I felt so strongly to open your eyes, like to keep your eyes open. Otherwise you are going to miss the miracles, whether it's trying to enhance your performance or whether it's trying to just do good and like just be a better person, or even like if you're going through hard times, keep your eyes open, pay attention to what's around you, pay attention to what's within you. And if you do that, you'll know what the next steps are. I think that's probably the biggest thing going through this whole experience of life that's kind of culminated for me at the moment is keep your eyes open, and pay attention both to how you feel as well as what's going on around you, and learn to impact other people and to serve and just bring some good in the world.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I hope that I can do a better job of living like Griff did, opening my eyes to the many things that we've got to be grateful for and those many miracles that you see on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. I really appreciate it, man. I think that, again, if just a couple people hear this and are impacted by it, I mean, again, that's just another way that Griff made a big impact with this, kind of final story and all of this. So thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. We wish you and Taylor and the kids the best, man, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.